Around the world, coronavirus has affected everyone.
Caught in the middle of a crisis.
We are in lockdown.
Teaching from home has been very challenging.
It has created challenges you have had to adapt to as teachers, students, parents.
There has been a humongous change.
We have to create this sense of global community.
Sometimes alone, sometimes together, but always as one. You have balanced life at home with teaching, learning, and new experiences. Teachers have found new ways to deliver outstanding English lessons at home that inspires learning.
It's the circle, very good. Here I am.
Students have motivated each other to speak,
Please say how to protect yourself and your family.
listen, read and write when not always together.
Good morning, children.
I have this feeling that I've learned loads.
I have drawn a picture of moon.
And of course, parents have supported their children's learning, creating classrooms everywhere and anywhere they can. You will look back with pride at what you have achieved. You continue to deliver hope and support to each other and the community around you.
It was actually really amazing having everyone checking in from around the world.
I love my job so much.
Thanks to all the teachers for making distance learning a successful experience.
So no matter when your school returns, whatever your classroom looks like, wherever you are, just know that we will continue to support all of you every step of the way. So thank you to our Cambridge communities all around the world.
I want to thank Cambridge Assessment English.
You have given me the best advice.
Thanks to our teachers.
Thank you, teachers, so much.
Thank you so much for all your support.
You are the best teachers ever.
Thank you for everything.
Good morning and welcome to our seminar about Brexit, which is hosted by Cambridge Assessment English and chaired by UK NARIC. I am Petra Olsson, and for most of you, I'm your main contact at Cambridge. The video you just saw was our thank you to all our teachers who kept on teaching and keep on teaching during the pandemic. As you know, the Cambridge English qualification are not just tests, but actual exams, and most students are either studying for the exam at school or they follow a language improvement course before sitting the exam. And during the spring and the summer, test centres around the world had to close, and some are still closed today. But teachers kept on teaching so that students would be prepared once they were able to access the test centre. And most of our centres are now open, and we do see a large number of students sitting their exams. But we don't just want to thank our teachers, we want to thank you too. We have had many cases of students not having their English exam results on time, and many of you have been patient and accepted late results. Your flexibility has meant a lot to a large number of very stressed students. So thank you very much. This pandemic has and is affecting us in different ways, and the world has been talking about not much else. It was as if Brexit was forgotten. Well, it's very much back on the agenda now, and today we're going to talk about Brexit and the impact on international admissions and recruitment for UK universities. As many of you know, we would normally hold this seminar in London, but as we had to move it online, we limited the number of sessions. But I think we managed to get 4 highly relevant and interesting talks about different aspects of Brexit, so about policies, admission trends, transnational education and immigration. I also believe that for the first time we have some European universities attending, and welcome to you, and I hope this will be relevant for you as well. As we are online and relying very much on home internet connections, please bear with us if we run into issues. Make sure you are in Chrome, it usually works best. And if you're having issues on your side, just try to refresh. The session is recorded, and we will share the recording with you afterwards. We would like this seminar to be interactive, so please put any comments or any questions in the chat box, and we'll try to get most questions answered after each session. So as I mentioned, we had 4 sessions, and there will be a 10-minute break in the middle for you to grab a coffee. And I will now hand over to Chris Lyons from UK NARIC, who will be the chair of this event. Chris is the head of external engagement at UK NARIC, responsible for engaging with members and stakeholders, learning about the needs and challenges across the education sector, and exploring ways in which NARIC can provide appropriate solutions. His role is to engage, represent, and listen. Chris has worked at UK NARIC since 2007. He has chaired the Quality and Standards Working Group since 2015, and has been chairing this event since 2017. Thank you, enjoy today, and over to you, Chris.
Thanks very much for the warm and kind welcome, Petra. It's great to be back. And hello and good morning, everyone else, to this year's Cambridge Assess English event. Leading the way in international admissions and recruitment, Europe and the UK moving forward together. I am Chris Lyons, and I am indeed the head of external engagement at UK NARIC, and it's a pleasure to come back for me to chair another webinar session with Petra and her colleagues at Cambridge. So thank you again for inviting me back, and I'm certain that this event, though different, is going to be every bit as good as previous years' sessions and presentations have been. I just want to echo what Petra said and say it's a real shame that we can't all be together in person today, particularly at such a wonderful venue as the Royal Society of Chemistry's library. So instead, you just have to make do with my spare room and study, such as the joys of Zoom and virtual living. Just to reflect a little bit on today's event, I think it's incredible to think back to where we started off with these seminars 3 or 4 years ago and where we've been over the last few years. At the last event, as Petra said, leaving the EU seemed to be the central story. It occupied all the headlines, it dominated Twitter sphere, it was in every UK political discussion. Who would have anticipated the events of this year and the fact that discussion around Brexit would have been overshadowed and dominated by other stories, and in particular of the global pandemic. And not quite, but not far off the 11th hour, it might in some quarters seem amazing or even dismaying to think that we in the UK are still speculating over what will happen and what things will be like come January the 1st. Everyone is affected and will be affected, and education is evidently no different at all. As Petra has said this morning, we're going to hear from 4 familiar and friendly and informed faces. They're going to be speaking to us about their different perspectives on the situation as it currently stands and looking towards the future as it is perceived. As per the programme, we're delighted to welcome Anna-May Jansen from UUKI, Mark Wilson from UCAS, Vangelis Siligiris from Nottingham Trent University, and Deepa Chadha from UKISA. In advance, a very warm welcome to you as speakers too. As Petra has also said, we are grateful for your attendance and interest this morning. We'll welcome your questions throughout. There'll be the opportunity to ask them at the end of each speaker's presentation. And there is a team of people that are going to be monitoring what is going on in the chat and highlighting questions to be asked. So thanks in advance for your interest and participation. Okay, so let's get on with the session for this morning and get on with the programme. I'm now going to introduce our first speaker, who is Anna-May Jansen. Anna-May is the head of European engagement at Universities UK International, and she leads their European policy and engagement activity, working to maximise the sector's profile, impact and visibility in Brussels and in other European countries. Prior to her joining UUKI, Anna-May worked at the Netherlands House for Education and Research, where she represented the Dutch knowledge field in Brussels. So what better qualified person than to speak with us this morning and to give us the UUKI update on Brexit. So welcome, Anna-May, over to you.
Good morning. Thank you, Chris, and thank you for such kind words, and thank you to Cambridge Assessment for inviting me back to speak once more at this lovely event. It is a pleasure to join you, and I think, I can switch. Yes, there we go. I've got control on my slides. Everything's going to be fine. What I'm going to try to do, of course, there are a lot of uncertainties when it comes to Brexit, and it indeed has been a very strange year, as Chris has already said, where Brexit seemed to drop off the political agenda, but it's back again. And there are still quite a few uncertainties when it comes to what our world will look like from the 1st of January onwards. I'll try to give you the knowledge that I have and the information that I have, and therefore I hope that I can give you some clarity on certain issues. But I'm also very much aware that there are still things that are unclear, and those questions are very live, and is something that we are working on diligently. So, without wanting to repeat the obvious and say things that you already are, I thought it might be a good idea to start with where are we right now. And as you all know, on the 31st of January 2020, the UK left the EU, and we are now in the last stretch of what is called the transition period. The negotiations for the future relationship between the UK and the EU have been ongoing since March. There was a slight delay, of course, due to the pandemic, but they are now back high on the political agenda. In a meeting in June, which was a meeting of the Withdrawal Agreement Joint Committee, it was then when the UK officially said we don't want to extend the transition period. So that really means that whatever we want to have in place by the 1st of January needs to be sorted by the end of the year. Negotiations have been going on through the summer as well, but progress has been slower than we'd like it to be. The last official round of negotiations was in the week of the 28th of September, and yesterday was the first day of a 2-day special European Council that will talk about Brexit, and the outcome hopefully would be the result that we have some sufficient progress on the negotiations, and that the UK and the EU could go into what is called as the tunnel. And the tunnel basically is a way in which that the negotiating parties can really intensify talks. But first, the EU and the UK need to determine that enough progress has been made in order to go into the tunnel. And what the tunnel allows them to do really is that they can really focus on those talks, and there won't be any media briefings, there won't be any press releases, there won't be any going back and forth with other stakeholders externally. It's really the senior negotiating team that focuses on the issues at hand, and they will then try to hammer out a deal. So that is something hopefully that will happen soon, but the noises we hear both in the UK and the EU are sometimes positive, sometimes negative. They're really, I personally wouldn't want to make a bet on how likely it is that we are soon to be going into that tunnel, but I'm keeping my fingers crossed. So just as a repeat, and for those who know the organization, this won't be any surprises to you, but our priorities for the future relationship are obviously association to Erasmus+, Horizon Europe, minimal disruption immigration-wise for students and staff to come and study and work here. And there are some other really important issues which I'm going to address later on in the presentation as well that need sorting out, such as data protection, qualification recognition, and provision of educational services. So just to kind of run you through what the options are, there really remains a very real risk that by the end of the year, the asks that we have for the future relationship are not secured. There are a couple of things going on at the same time. So you have the UK-EU future relationship negotiations, but on the other hand, you also have the budget, the EU budget, the 7-year budget, but also the budgets for the individual European programs such as Erasmus and Horizon Europe. So they are related and at the same time separate processes that are going on. So it's not only the negotiations about the future relationship that determine if and when the UK can associate to these programs, but it's also the budget process that really is important, because only at the point when the budgets for Erasmus and Horizon are determined, you can really go into the last bit of negotiating access to these programs. So because, you know, the negotiations on the future trade relationship are, let's say, you know, going slower than we wanted to, because the budget negotiations are being delayed. There is a real chance that, you know, the UK won't associate yet on the 1st of January. But like I said, there are a couple of scenarios that you can see on the slide. So the first one would be, okay, the EU-UK future relationship negotiations are going well, and they are concluded in a timely manner, and also the budget negotiations on the EU side are finalized on time. If that all goes well, then you'll have full association of the UK to the EU programs on the 1st of January. However, if the EU-UK negotiations on the future relationship are delayed, but association still looks likely, then, you know, association is on the table. You know, we're not out of the negotiations yet, but we aren't there yet. So you could have a scenario where by the 1st of January, negotiations are still ongoing, either because the future trade relationship negotiations have been delayed or the budget negotiations have been delayed. But we're, you know, association is still on the table. So we just need a little bit more time to get there. And what you then would need is stopgap systems that would really fill in the gap between the 1st of January and the point that the UK associates. And then the third scenario is that, you know, either the EU-UK future relationship negotiations fail, and or the budget negotiations are significantly delayed. There you have the chance that the UK doesn't associate to the EU programs. And of course, the major point there would be because the UK-EU future relationship negotiations would fail. That would mean that the UK would have to have in place the domestic alternative schemes by the 1st of January 2021. You'd need them up and running, basically, by that point. Something that I think is really important to say here, and we get quite a lot of questions about this, and I understand the confusion, but that is that the scenario we are facing now, that where we possibly don't have an agreed future trade relationship with the EU, is a completely different scenario from the 2 almost no-deal exits we had last year. Last year, if those no-deal exits actually had happened, you'd have a scenario where the UK would be kicked out of the EU programs while the programs were still running, while projects were still running, while funding was granted. And that would have been an extremely complicated and difficult situation to deal with. Now we're in a scenario where, yes, of course, we want a future trade relationship which encompasses our association to these programs to be sorted by the end of the year. But if that doesn't happen, then we are not kicked out of a running program. Everything that has been agreed in the withdrawal agreement on the current programs means that for the rest of the current programs, we are part of them, and all the projects, even if they're run past the end of this year, are all fine, nothing to worry about. It's just that then we would have to switch to domestic alternatives. So it's a different situation. It's not a cliff edge, end of the world type of situation which we were facing last year. Yeah, I just think that's a really important point to make, and to say that that means that our preparations, which I'm going to talk to you about in a second, differ than they did last year. So this slide is really just a slide to give you, and the slides will be shared, I am assuming, after the event. This is just a slide with all the links to the resources that we have for universities to help prepare them for the end of the transition period. So the first is a document, a guide, as we call it, which really goes through all the different areas that universities need to prepare for. Then we've got 2 documents, really specifically FAQs for students, on what are the different scenarios for them, and I'll come back to that as well in terms of fees and in terms of immigration rules. I won't go too much into immigration because we've got an immigration update coming up. And then on the bottom line, you see 4 webinars which we are hosting. One big one, which basically covers everything, and then 3 specialized, one on immigration, on Rise in Europe, and on Erasmus. In the case we don't have a deal, what do you need to be doing by then? The dates for these are all hyperlinks, so when you click on them, you can see the dates. But the first one, the webinar, is the 28th of October, then 3, 4, and 5 of November. So, but you'll get all of this. As I said, I promised to go a little bit into the different scenarios for students. So the 2 FAQs we have, and I'll only go into the EU student one right now, just mindful of time. What the FAQs really do is tell an EU student, okay, you're coming to the UK on a specific date for a specific course. What is your starting date, and what does that effectively mean for you? So just to run you through these 3 scenarios that we've lined up in these FAQs. So the first one is that EU students starting a full degree course in 2020, 2021 and beyond, who arrive in the UK before the 31st of December 2020. These students are eligible for home fee status in all nations and tuition fee loan in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. And they're eligible to apply for the UK settlement scheme, allowing them to remain in the UK after studying, provided they have applied by the 30th of June 2021. Then the second scenario is EU students starting a full degree course in the 2020-2021 academic year, arriving after the 31st of December 2020. So then these students are still eligible for home fee status and tuition fee loan. They will need to apply for a student visa through the new student route, and they will be eligible to apply for the graduate route after they've graduated. And then the third scenario is EU students starting for a full degree course in 2021, 2022, and arriving after the 31st of December 2020. These students, the students who are not covered by the withdrawal agreement, are not eligible for home fee status and tuition fee loan in England, Northern Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. You will need to apply for a student visa through the student route and will be eligible for the graduate route. I'd like to say that international fees always depend on the university and the type of degree that students are interested. So when you get questions about them, I would say encourage students to reach out to the university that they're interested in. It's not immediately a doubling or tripling of the fees. We hear that quite a bit, that people are worried about that, and it really isn't. It really depends on the university and the type of degree that you're doing. So we always advise students to reach out to the university that they are interested in. Of course, there's a specific caveat for Irish citizens. They are eligible to apply to the EU settlement scheme. They don't have to, because everything's covered under the common travel area after Brexit. The fee status won't change for them, and the right to access to benefits will also stay the same because of the common travel area agreement. Moving on, as I said, I dive a little bit into the guide document that we made for universities. I won't go into all of these because that would take quite a long time. But just to say that the briefing covers all of these things you see here. So immigration rules, research collaboration, mobility, transnational education, and a whole host of other things as well. And just to dive into a few of them. So for staff and student mobility, we drafted some guidance for universities. For the current program, as I already hinted at earlier, it's really important to know that we stay part of this program until the end of the program. That also goes for projects that run past the 31st of December 2020. You know, any money granted under the current program is fine. So that means that student and staff exchanges under the current program can continue as planned. Then you have the next program. So if an agreement on Erasmus Plus Association is reached by the end of the transition period, then we will be part of that program and everything will go on as you are used to. If no agreement is reached, then the UK government has committed to fund an international student and staff mobility scheme, which would be UK-wide as a replacement to the Erasmus Plus participation. There isn't a lot that the UK government has shared publicly about this scheme yet. We know they are working on it very hard, and we are feeding into that process. And they have committed to funding it, they just haven't committed to how much funding. And we also know that it would only copy the mobility aspects of Erasmus. It would not provide the Key Action 2 and Key Action 3 projects that Erasmus does. And we also know that it is unlikely that inbound mobility would be funded. So that is something to keep in mind as well. Then, yeah, for Erasmus 2021-2027, like I said, our priority is to associate. We've been lobbying very hard on this. We've also signed a joint statement with the Association of Colleges and the European Students' Union and US-UK and the Erasmus Student Network, just to really reiterate the loss this would mean for students if the UK wasn't part of the Erasmus program. Just a little bit of information on the negotiations. There is a difference in position on what both sides want when it comes to Erasmus. The EU offers very much the whole program for 7 years, and there is a GDP-based calculation for contribution, which just means that you pay for the entire program. While as the UK position is more interested just in the mobility part of the program, not so much the rest, as I already said. And the official line they're giving is time limited and parts of the program. So you can imagine that there's quite a big gap in terms of what both sides want in terms of association. And that is why we are not, we think there is a real chance that we won't be part of Erasmus, which would be a shame because it's a program with great added value. Then on transnational education, some guidance as well. So the UK has quite an extensive transnational engagement activity across Europe, and how the end of the transition period would affect that provision depends on what kind of transnational education UK universities are providing, where they're providing it, and what kind of agreement we're getting. Then, so what we're actually suggesting universities to do is to check what kind of third country requirements there are for, and administrative barriers there are for the people, universities, providing transnational education in those territories. You also need to check what the latest is on professional qualification recognitions. Quality assurance is something you really need to look at, and also, try and assess what the impacts are for the employment status of students going forward. Then something I already hinted at, qualification recognition. So in the transition period, the EU law continues to apply. So that means that the MRPQ directive, which ensures mutual recognition for professional qualifications, continues to apply. So everyone who got their professional recognition, qualification recognized prior to that is fine. I apologize for the noise. They're working at the road. And my neighbors are doing some restructuring as well. Unfortunately, there's noise everywhere. So anyways, if you've got everything recognized right now, you're fine and you don't need to get your qualification recognized again. From 2021 and onwards, there is a difference in approach on what both sides want when it comes to qualification recognition. The UK wants to make sure that there is a pathway for recognition, and that really means that it will be easier for people to get their degrees recognized. And the EU side, it's lighter touch. They just want to put in place a framework so that organizations bilaterally can decide to mutually recognize their professional qualifications. So whatever the outcome of the negotiations, it's extremely likely that people who are doing a degree that falls under the professional qualification directive at the moment will need to take extra steps in order to get their degrees recognized. On data protection, there is, again, during the transition period, the directive that governs all of this continues to apply, so you don't need to worry, no immediate action is required. What is happening is that, what you see is that the EU and the UK are now in the process of trying to get an adequacy decision for the UK. And what the adequacy decision really does is it says, okay, the protection of personal data in the UK is of a height that is sufficient with EU regulations, and therefore we don't need any extra protectionary measures to be put in place in order to exchange personal data. If that process is ongoing, if the EU does not give the UK an data adequacy decision by the end of this year, there are a couple of things that you can do. So, for example, you can put in contractual clauses that deal with this, and the specific website of the Information Commissioner's Office gives you exactly what you need to do. And you need to get an understanding of your data flows in order to understand where you would need to take extra action when it comes to your data flows, really. So almost done, and I'm sorry for speaking so fast and trying to get through it. It's just a lot of information to go through in a short time. But basically what I want to say is that we know COVID kind of has taken over our lives. Everyone is still very much working on everything COVID related, which is completely understandable. But we're only 9 weeks until Christmas holiday, and we may have a deal, we may not. We just don't know. So I would say, based on the things that I've given you to think about today, look at your own processes internally and try to determine what you need to do in order to be prepared for the end of the year, whatever scenario comes. So thank you very much. That was it for me.
Thanks very much, Anna-May. That was wonderful. Plenty of information for people to take on there. And just as an initial observation, how have you found working within this sort of current climate? Because you talked about some very real risks and frustrations. There seem to be a lot of unknowns, don't there? So how do you cope at UUKI, and how do the institutions in the UK cope?
Well, to be honest, and I'm Dutch, so I'm going to be honest, it's frustrating from time to time. Really, it is. I know that our government colleagues are working very hard to make sure that we've got, domestic alternatives in place and that we get the answers that we need. But processes aren't moving as quickly as they need to be. I mean, it's the clock is ticking, and we're nearly there. And we really don't have the answers yet to some really quite significant questions. And yeah, that's just incredibly frustrating. At this point in time, I would have ideally have liked to be able to tell universities, if we don't have a deal, this is going to be in place, and this is what you need to do in order to prepare. I can to an extent, but at some point I just hit a wall because there isn't enough information to share yet.
Yeah, that's it's quite a challenge for you, and I can hear that, and we can see that from what you've said in your presentation. Just want to say there's a few questions from people in the audience, and thank you everybody for the questions that you've posted so far. Just a reminder that we do have the chat function, so post your questions in there. So Anna-May, if you wouldn't mind, I've just got a few to ask you.
Sure.
Adele David has asked, thanks Adele for your question. She said, do you expect that staff mobility and traineeships will also be covered by the new UK mobility scheme, or is it just going to apply to the student mobility?
So yeah, we have told the Department for Education, who is working quite hard on national placement, that staff and student mobility would be something that we would want a national replacement scheme to have, and they haven't confirmed officially if it would be both. Staff, a student, yes, 100% sure. Staff, it's something that we are also still waiting on, but we have this is what we did advise them, that we think it's quite important to also include that.
Okay, great. So it perhaps falls into that category that we were just saying about a degree of uncertainty, with a degree of hope.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks for that one. There's another question from Markela Sharambu, and forgive me for my pronunciation there, Markela. She's asking, EU students with settled status, can they still get the UK loan for the 2021 intake?
Yes, absolutely. So anyone arriving in the UK by the end of this year and then applying for the EU settlement scheme, and either if you have pre-settled or settled, it doesn't matter, you will retain the rights that you have as an EU citizen, as you would have in the past if we hadn't left. So they will indeed be entitled to home fee status and loans. Okay,
great. Gosh, it seems like there's a lot of sort of ifs and buts that people need to be able to remember. It must be so challenging.
It is, but we're trying. So that's why I put that one slide in with all the different resources that we're making, because we're trying to make it as accessible and as easy readable for people as possible. So that is why these student FAQs really, walk you through all the different scenarios, and we're trying to update them as well when it comes to short-term mobility and immigration rules as well, which also still has quite some buts and ifs and question marks. So we update them as and when we can and get more information. But yeah, there are a lot of different scenarios and a lot of different things that you need to think about, unfortunately.
An unenviable task, it sounds like. I've got another question for you, and this is from Pip Pisanu. She's asking, is there an opportunity for a UK institution not to apply the rules with regards to changing international fees for undergraduate students starting in September 2021?
So yeah, so we actually had asked some legal advice. So there we go again. I do apologize. There's building work everywhere around me. I was hoping I'd be spared this morning, but no. We had asked some legal advice, and the problem is that there is a risk in whatever choice universities make. You could theoretically say we decide to offer EU or home fee status, sorry. The problem you face there is that you do run into the risk of direct or indirect discrimination. And none of this has been tested by the courts because it never had to be. So it's quite there is no risk-free option for universities, which is not really something that you want to say, but unfortunately, it's for each individual university to choose themselves. They need to really have that internal discussion with their management about the risks involved and, about the student body that they have and their reliance on EU students, and really make that, really weigh those two up and make that decision.
It's a good question, isn't it? Very good question.
Yeah.
Okay, if we sort of focus towards the end of this year, beginning of next year, then we're talking a little bit about preparations, perhaps. What do you think are the most important areas that we need to be focused on in preparing for the end of this transition period?
Yeah, so I would say, even though, of course, everything, but the EU programs, if we don't have them, then it's a matter of wrapping up what we have. If we do have them, then everything will just continue as we are right now. I would say if your institution is involved in any way with transnational education or professional qualification recognition, if you are, teaching degrees that fall under the professional qualification recognition directive, then those two, I would say, are things that you really need to get a grip on, definitely, and data protection.
Okay, great. And in terms of the actual end of the transition period, we were talking earlier about sort of the permutations, and just to remind everybody, just to reaffirm, if you like, that we're talking about a different kind of scenario if there is if we have a no deal, aren't you, to the situation that we found ourselves in last year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really important for people to understand, is that it's not a cliff edge. It's not, we won't be kicked out of programs. If we don't have a deal by the end of this year, it'll be a completely different, still a lot of big changes, but it won't be as dramatic as last year. It'll be a matter of, rather than we're being kicked out of programs, it'll be a matter of we need to get used to new programs, and we need to get sorted and make sure that we engage with these new programs and understand what they mean and what kind of admin requirements and how do you submit, all of these questions, which is still a lot of work, don't get me wrong, but it's definitely significantly different than what we had last year.
Okay, thank you. And just one final question from me, if you don't mind.
Sure, go ahead.
I'm just wondering, when we were talking about the different permutations for fees for students from the EU in the coming years, what is your inkling? What is your feeling about what might happen with numbers of students from the EU? Do you have any sort of indicators as to what is likely to happen? Any sort of intelligence, if you like, from within different countries? I'd just be interested to know what your take on it all is.
Very, very difficult to predict. And I think the issue, if we didn't have COVID, you could focus on the figures and say whatever impact is the result of Brexit. Of course, now we're faced with a global pandemic, and that just will make it nearly impossible to read the data and say this is due to Brexit, this is due to COVID. So that is just an incredibly tricky question. We're trying. Yeah, it's stupid to say, but it's just a little bit too early to say. Still, we're trying to have a look at search behavior of students in other countries and stuff like that. But it's very difficult to get a handle on, especially now with COVID.
Okay, yeah, well, thanks for that. And I suspect that we are probably going to continue meeting up at events such as this, where we're going to be asking and answering very similar sorts of questions, aren't we?
I would imagine so, yes.
Well, Anna-May, thanks very much for your time this morning in presentation. Really interesting. Some great questions asked from the audience as well, and some super answers. So great to see you. A pity we're not in London, but yeah, thank you very much. Hopefully see you soon. Enjoy the rest of the session.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you to the audience for joining us. And thank you, Chris, for being a wonderful moderator. And yeah, hopefully next time, see you in London.
Fingers crossed. Yeah, bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.
Great. So we've just heard there from Anna-May from Universities UK. Now I'm going to call upon our second speaker who's going to present to us this morning, and that's Mark Wilson. He's the Customer Experience Manager from UCAS. Just going to give a little bit of an introduction to Mark. He's responsible for coordinating UCAS's international customers, providing support for them, including international customer and stakeholder engagement and service development. Joined UCAS in 2015 in June, and he's part of the operations team. Prior to that, Mark had over 15 years worth of experience in international education, recruitment and admissions. He's held several senior international posts and led international teams at different UK universities. Tells me he's had the privilege and enjoyment during this time of working on a range of European activities, including leading on Erasmus and other exchanges, developing and managing joint degree partnerships, so that ties in nicely with the whole notion of TNE, in France and other countries, and recruiting students from across the region. A bit of a confession from Mark as well, by the sounds of things. He tells me he's a little rusty, and I'm assuming this is in relation to his language skills. He's a rusty francophone and francophile, and he's also relearning German. So rest assured, Mark, no language tests this morning. At least I'm not anticipating any anyway. Okay, so a very warm welcome to you, Mark, and now over to you for your particular part of this session. Good morning, Mark.
Morning, and morning to everybody who's attending today. Thank you to Cambridge Assessment for inviting me to take part. I really enjoyed the previous seminars. Such a shame we can't be at the Royal Society of Chemistry in London, but I did buy some fancy biscuits for the coffee break just to kind of get that spirit going back here. I asked Chris to include my European credentials in that introduction, as I think European recruitment and the wider set of activities for higher education is really important for universities and colleges here. And I'm going to talk a bit about the trends in undergraduate admissions and recruitment in particular. So moving from the quite broad perspective taken by Anna-May to look at the trends from a undergraduate admissions perspective in particular, what happened this year insofar as what we can tell you about the story to date. And although we're getting asked quite frequently, do we think EU students will continue to apply to undergraduate courses in the UK for 2021 and onwards? It's quite a difficult question to answer. So instead of that, I'm going to pick up on some of the characteristics of the EU undergraduate cohort that we can discern from our data, just to give you something to think about in terms of what that might mean for messaging and engagement from a recruitment and admissions point of view. So just to start off then, looking back, this will be quite a familiar story for some of you, the background to the UK's engagement with Europe from a recruitment point of view. So over the long run, there's been really quite decent growth in numbers coming to the UK to study on undergraduate programs from other countries of the European Union. And although the growth has not been as steep as you can see here for non-EU international students coming to join undergraduate programs, there nonetheless has been a growth from around 30,000 students in 2006 to almost 54,000 in the 2016 cycle, just before the UK voted to leave the EU. And one of the interesting contrasts to non-EU source countries or markets for undergraduate recruitment, in terms of non-EU, you see a pattern which is dominated by China as the very large sending country, a couple of other countries with thousands of applicants like the US, India, Malaysia, Hong Kong, and so on. But after that, it falls away, and we deal with much smaller undergraduate cohorts from other non-EU countries. In the EU recruitment sense, however, there's been a real spread of numbers in a long-standing way from France and Germany, from other countries that were the accession countries 15 years ago, Cyprus, Romania, Bulgaria, and then more recently also some growth from places like Italy, Spain, Portugal. So real spread of markets with over 2,000 applicants per year joining UK universities. I think the UK's Brexit referendum did cause some uncertainty and some disruption to that sort of overall growth period, which previously had only been sort of interrupted by the fee changes in 2012. Since 2017, we've seen real flat numbers from the EU, slightly up or down year on year up to now. And that was really the pattern that we saw in the early part of this year's cycle, with 43,000 EU applicants by 15th of January, a key deadline for UCAS 2020. And that was a 2% reduction on the previous year. As previous speakers and our sort of chair for today's event have commented already, the impact of the coronavirus pandemic has really turned a lot of things on its head, and we were really keen to focus on what had happened with that admissions journey for our non-UK cohorts throughout those key months when the pandemic took hold and really started to disrupt people's lives and the education of many students. So we've got here a chart which shows you new applications coming in from EU and non-EU students from January through to June 2020. So that's the monthly totals of new applicants. Now, most years we do get between 85 and 90% of our EU applicants who apply by that January deadline. But there's still a fair few applications that trickle in after January through to the summer. And you can see here the EU applicant numbers are those indicated in red. There was generally stability in the number of applicants coming through on a year-on-year perspective. And we saw very much that the characteristics of our EU undergraduate applicant cohort suggested that there hadn't been this disruption in terms of people's intent to apply and study, whereas you can see the numbers did drop off slightly from outside the EU. And later throughout the cycle, as offers were being made, there were further concerns within UCAS and across the sector about what students would do when they started to receive offers, but assessed those and evaluated their decisions in the circumstances that they were facing with the pandemic evolving really rapidly with some quite serious disruption and consequences for populations around the world. So this shows you a comparison between 2020 and 2019. I'm sorry if you're looking on small screen, some of the text there can be quite small to read potentially, but essentially it shows you the different responses that students could give by the key reply deadlines. So when an offer's been made and students are having to make a decision, do I accept the offer, do I decline the offer, what did students do at the kind of key crunch point in this year's admission cycle, and how did that compare to last year? So when we reached that point in mid-June, compared to 2019, there were 6% fewer EU applicants who are accepting offers and saying effectively, yes, I would like to study at the UK university that has made me an offer, at just over 35,000 EU applicants. There was a small 3 percentage point negative change in the proportion of EU applicants from the total cohort who are accepting an offer, and a slightly smaller increase of 2 percentage points of EU applicants who were declining all offers, either by actively replying or by just not getting back to us at all to say yes or no. So effectively disengaging. But EU applications had been below the 2019 level throughout the cycle, so we would expect the number of acceptances at this stage to be lower. As you can see from the chart, really the change was quite minor, and 3 percentage points fewer accepting an offer, 2 percentage point change in those declining all offers was not as bad as it could be. And now that we've reached the stage where we've come through that period over the summer where places are firmed up, results and grades, however they were arrived at around the world, were passed through to universities by us or by the students, and places were confirmed. So we've got a provisional view now of what has happened this year. And as I say, provisionally, we've got 29,630 EU students who've been placed on UK undergraduate courses for a 2020 start. Obviously, some of them may be starting online and seeking to join on-campus study at a later point. Now, this is a 2% decrease compared to the same point where we take this provisional snapshot of acceptances data from the 2019 cycle. But one of the really interesting things is that we'd started off the summer in early August, 21% down on EU acceptances, EU students being confirmed at the universities they were holding offers from. And that was really changed throughout the summer, potentially helped by students on some of the international curricula where grades were recalculated in favour of those grades that have been assessed by their school. But certainly we can see just on the surface reading of those numbers, this was very unlike previous summers where there isn't really much change throughout the weeks of the summer in which students' places are confirmed. So if we were 2% down on the previous year in other cycles, it would pretty much be 2% down consistently week on week compared to the same point in the previous year. So clearly there was a lot of uncertainty persisting through to the summer, and I think that had impacted what students were doing and when they were doing it. But that seems to have changed a little bit as students ultimately made decisions to confirm their places and go through with that acceptance onto a UK university course. And just looking where those students are from, looking at some of the key markets, you can see here the number of students who have accepted a place and the percentage change on 2019. This again, just to reiterate, is from our provisional acceptances data, which was a snapshot we took about a month ago or so on the 10th of September. And we will have more information coming out in due course. But for now, based on this provisional view, we are looking at effectively quite steep decreases in some key sending countries like Bulgaria, 12% down, Italy the same, less significant but still quite sizable negative decreases from Greece, Portugal and Romania, but a few countries, including Ireland, but also Spain, Poland and Germany, where there's actually more students this year accepted onto a course than there had been last year. And you know, Spain in particular at 9% increases is quite good news for those universities that value their Spanish cohort of undergraduate students. So, as I mentioned before, we take this provisional snapshot. We will have further data to share as we go into the autumn, and we release a much wider set of statistics, which will be accessible via a kind of interactive dashboard on UCAS's website. So do look out for that over the coming weeks. But just to move to the second part of the talk I wanted to share with you today, looking at where the students come from, what kind of profile they have, we felt this might give us some clues for the purposes of today's session to kind of think about what that might mean for future recruitment potential. So we've heard a lot about the changes that are going to come through in terms of tuition fee status, eligibility for loans and financial support, immigration changes and so on. So what we see then, I wanted to draw attention to a changing pattern in the age, the typical age of your EU student for undergraduate study has really changed in the last 10 years. So again, this takes a long run view from sort of 2006 up to 2019. And you can see the orange and grey lines at the top there represent the 18 and 19-year-old students applying through UCAS, and they have seen that cohort, that age group cohort has seen the steepest increase since 2012. Numbers have really sort of picked up, and that's driven the growth, because the students in older age groups, whether that be the sort of 20-year-olds in the yellow line, or I've grouped together everybody 21 and over in the sort of light blue line in the middle there, you can actually see the decrease in the numbers coming through. So some of you may be seeing this on your campuses. You may be engaging much more with the schools that these students, 18, 19-year-old students, are exiting directly to apply to your universities. But I think it's really interesting in terms of what this might mean. You can speculate to a degree about what this might mean in terms of the students' motivations, students' ability or readiness to pay if they're paying an increased tuition fee, the influences that might play a part in the decision, and things like other aspects of the experience around safety, for example, particularly in 2021, where the impacts of the pandemic will still being felt, and families will potentially want to keep their students in a study destination much closer to home, rather than perhaps supporting a student looking at the US or other English-speaking destinations. So a quite interesting shift over the last 10 years in terms of that age profile of students. I think there's certainly another aspect related to the advisors, the counsellors, agents, and the intermediaries that are influencing the decision that students are making, other than parents and immediate families. Now, we are working with a lot of the international schools within the EU that are sending students. We've got something like just under 1,400 schools that are set up. We have looked to see what's happening with the advisors. We're getting some of the anecdotal evidence, some of the critical friend group engagement that we do, which is showing that there will still be interest from the schools, from the advisors who will be working with us still. We're seeing them set up ready for 2021 applications, engaging with us at our teacher and advisor conferences. So we certainly haven't seen a complete switching away from that advisor point of view, but at the same time, some of that anecdotal evidence is suggesting that a lot of the school counsellors are seeing the likelihood of students looking to other destinations. We also work with a number of agents based in the EU. So there's quite concentration of student numbers in a relatively small number of agents. We had in 2019 something like 10,000 of the EU applicants. About a quarter of our total EU applicants was supported by an agent set up and registered with UCAS. And of the 179 or so EU-based agents that are set up with us, we see real concentration in particular markets. So, somewhere like Romania, for example, a half dozen agents might be looking at sort of 25% of the market there in terms of student numbers. Portugal, really surprisingly, is more like 3/4 of the students from Portugal coming through via a very, very small number of agents. So if you are working with agents, if you are one of the UK universities that has those kind of relationships, then these are really key influencers. We think they may be catalysts in terms of decisions to switch away. There certainly are a set of influencers that need to be engaged with to kind of keep promoting some of those messages for why students should continue to study in the UK. I think linked to this, there's certainly some questions around the tuition fee changes, which we'll see answered throughout the course of the coming year. This chart really sort of is a piece of earlier analysis that somebody had done internally at UCAS to plot the size of applicant markets in different European countries versus an estimate based on comparison of HESA and student loan company data for Northern Ireland, Wales and England at least, so we can get a sense of dependency on the tuition fee loans, and that's really varied from country to country. So you can see highlighted with that circle on the right hand side there, a number of Eastern European countries have high to very high uptake of student loans by students coming through from those sending countries, whereas in France it's more like 1 in 3. So certainly there's going to be different segments that we can look at within the EU that will have different responses and different approaches to the changing eligibility for tuition fee loans and home fee status. I think it's probably good to just say that we shouldn't underestimate the complexity and the nuances within that. We know from some of the British Council work that there are wider perceptions of costs and benefits. It's not just tuition fees, but students will also look at factors like additional costs associated with getting a visa, NHS health charges, availability of work to kind of get part-time wages coming in to help with that. And it certainly does mean that competitor destinations the relative attractiveness compared to the UK will change. But certainly I think there's something in it for something to be said about how not all students from the EU will be affected in the same way by changes to financial issues. And finally, I wanted to just talk about this sort of question of, international orientation. And so by this, we're sort of taking a proxy measure of how kind of internationally oriented some applicant cohorts might be based on the qualifications they're studying for. And this really relates to how far the international curriculum bodies have engaged with the school sector in different countries within the EU. We took a snapshot earlier in the year looking at 2020 applicant data, so we could identify which applicants were following what we call the international curriculum compared to national curriculum. So if it was Greece, for example, rather than the Apollitarion, who's studying on international baccalaureate or one of the international A-levels and so forth. So there are some countries like Germany, Spain, Cyprus and Greece where I was personally quite surprised by the relatively high percentage of applicants that we see who have those international curriculum qualifications. Over half in Germany and Spain. And I think this says something about the orientation that a lot of these students will have, that they took choices at earlier stages in their educational careers to take that international curriculum. So this hints at a different segment that might be continuing to find UK as an overseas study destination attractive. So I just wanted to finish up on this slide and just to explain what this is all about. These are 3 magazines that I've got sort of stacked up on my desk from early February of this year, from 3 pretty well-known sort of politics, current affairs magazines in the UK here. And I think they really represent for me the kind of the vast differences in view and perspective on what Brexit means. As a lot of people have said in this session already, since March, the pandemic has really overshadowed the question of Brexit, and it's starting to come out now again. And as we go into 2021, I think we'll really see what it means in particular for the impact on higher education. Now, from UCAS, we deal with a quite narrow slice of that. It's the undergraduate admissions rather than the wider set. And if I had to sort of pick one of these sort of headlines to kind of really state what I think it means for us, it would be The Economist's Into the Unknown, rather than the definitive over and out or the more sort of optimistic perspective from The Spectator. So things will change. There will be need for different engagement, and perhaps that will mean fewer undergraduate applicants, but it might mean that EU students look at us for postgraduate, for exchange opportunities, and that the opportunities will arise elsewhere. But I think we will still continue to see a core of students coming through the undergraduate application route as well. And we'll keep the sector up to date with our statistics and releases. So thank you very much for your time and attention. And I think we've got a few moments for questions.
Thanks as always, Mark. Great to hear from you and see you speaking, and always interesting to look through the stats that you present us with your work from UCAS. So thanks so much for that. Just a reminder to people in the audience that we do have the chat facility, so please do send your questions through. And I've got one that I want to highlight for you, Mark, which is from Horn Tidert. And Horn has asked, are there any full scholarships for master's degrees by EU to study in the UK? How do people receive the full scholarship of postgraduate studies to study in the UK?
So I think the question of funding and scholarships is one that perhaps other organisations are really well placed to provide more comprehensive information. So British Council is a good place to go. Of course, UCAS has traditionally much more of a undergraduate focus than postgraduate. So I think to sort of broaden the question out a little bit to wider questions of bursaries, funding and support, there was discussion in the earlier session about whether universities would be able to look at setting their own fee levels for EU students, not defaulting to the overseas tuition fee. And there are one or two out there that have made announcements about that in a transitional way already. Certainly for universities in Scotland, for undergraduate admissions from the student recruitment from the EU, that was actually something that represented a cost to the Scottish government, probably around £100 million a year. And over the summer, the Scottish government made a pledge to reinvest that money, which will be saved from 2021 onwards, back into education, including looking at scholarship provision for international and EU nationals. So there'll be a lot of stuff happening. I think it will be quite targeted and will vary from region and from institution. So you know, good luck with searches for those of you that are looking for that kind of support.
Thanks for that really thorough response, Mark. And just to let you know, I had a few connectivity issues, so if you see my video dipping in and out, I'm still here.
I thought you were just trying not to, you know, you trying to give limelight to the speaker there, rather. Yeah, that's fine.
I'll take the hint. Yeah. I've just got a couple of questions as well for you, and I don't know if I'm reading the data in the right way, but when you were talking about the provisional acceptances data, were you quite surprised by that? Because I don't know, when I was looking at certain elements that you were presenting, it looked like there were drops amongst some, but actually increases amongst others. And perhaps because of the effect of COVID, we might have anticipated there being a greater, a more profound effect in terms of applications. Have I misread the data there, or
no? So I think, you know, the pandemic has had a big disruptive effect. So that did initially seem like it wasn't impacting new applications coming through, but then later, as we got to the point where students had to make up their mind as to whether they were going to confirm their places, you know, they got their grades, they'd met conditions, but did they actually want to go to university? At the start of the summer, it looked like a significant number of them didn't. You know, there's a big 21% drop compared to the previous year. Now that actually didn't quite reverse itself, but certainly the position improved a lot from a UK university and college perspective. More of those students who were not confirmed in their places at the start of the summer became so by the end of the summer and start of the autumn. So we ended up around 2% down on the previous year, which is in line with the decrease in applicant numbers throughout the cycle. So I think there's a couple of things in that. So yes, that was the impact of the pandemic, but also what we didn't see was a lot of students rushing to get in before the bar dropped and they were no longer eligible for home fee status. You know, so we may have anticipated a slight bump in numbers because students were seeing 2020 as the last opportunity to study in the UK at home fee rates, but that doesn't seem to have happened across the board. And then it's been quite variable from country to country, as you picked out, with some countries like Spain, Poland, with not bad, quite significant increases, but others where perhaps student numbers have dropped by a fair amount too. So yeah, so that's pretty much where we are really.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, and as you said, also high increases amongst students from the Republic of Ireland as well. So yeah, that's fascinating. Another question has come through from Wendy, and thanks Wendy for this question. So just to address this to you, Mark, does UCAS expect more later applications post 15th of January this cycle, given the disruption to school schedules? Do you have any insights or intelligence on if EU applicants might be waiting to see about negotiations?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. We have just finished yesterday our first deadline. So, you know, medicine, dentistry, veterinary science, Oxford, Cambridge, so on. There's the October 15th deadline, and I think it's on the 29th of October that we'll actually be putting statistics out into the public domain to show comparisons to previous years and so on. But I think beyond the question of whether students were waiting to see what the situation might be with fee status and Brexit related issues, I think what often has been overlooked is the impact on the cohort behind the 2020 graduating cohort. I think the advisors that we speak to, they are talking about how the sort of students in their penultimate year throughout the pandemic, their teaching and learning had been really heavily hit. There's been disruption to processes around supporting students making their progression choices and university applications, and uncertainty too about how to recoup some of that lost time for the bit of the curriculum they missed in the last academic year. So I think this has had an impact on a lot of students and a lot of schools, and we know also that a lot of families are perhaps also taking a bit more time to consider things. You know, where should they send sons or daughters to study given the pandemic? So there's a lot of things that are pushing students towards later applications, and we'll have some numbers at a later point this autumn to start giving the first hints about that.
Great, that's really interesting. And of course that disruption also ties in with something that you mentioned in the middle of your talk, and you were talking about grades, and I think you said something along the lines of "and however they were arrived at." Obviously, there's been a great deal of disruption and challenge to how final grades are arrived at, as you say, no more so than in the UK. When you pass that data on to the universities, did you find that sort of new calculation of grade data, if you like, has caused any difficulties? Did it raise any eyebrows? That could have been within UCAS, it could have been also with the universities. What was the feeling?
I don't think it's a secret to kind of say that the change to centre assessed grades in the UK did alter the outlook quite considerably for a fair number of students. We are doing some analysis on this to give a much more detailed kind of deep dive into the impacts and how that's been felt across different cohorts. But yes, certainly more students became eligible for places at universities than had been the case after the calculated grades. I suspect that might have been the case. This is sort of more hypothesis, looking at some of the things that we noted, like the real change from the start of the summer to the end of the summer, beginning of the autumn, in the position on EU recruitment. There was a similar uncharacteristic change in where we were with China as well, for example. So yes, I think that whole disruption and the rejigging of grades has had a number of impacts, and yeah, we're certainly keen to explore that in a lot more detail.
Great. Just one final question, if I can indulge, Mark, and just wondered if you could just let us know if there are any other areas that UCAS is going to be looking into and reporting on to both assess the impact of Brexit and COVID-19 on international and European student demand.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do run a lot of reports and analysis throughout the year. So there is a long list for our analysis and insight team to get through. I think the focus initially might well be on widening participation cohorts in the UK, and what has happened for those groups of students. But we're taking an approach now where we're releasing a lot more data in ways that can be manipulated and interacted with on a self-serve basis by colleagues in universities and colleges and the wider sector. So we're putting all of that out on UCAS.com. I've got my email address up here on the closing screen. So if there are colleagues in international recruitment and admissions teams who have got particular things they're interested in, the conversations are ongoing at the moment within UCAS about what we should prioritize for our reporting analysis. So all ideas are very welcome.
Wonderful. I think, as ever, Mark, whether it's live or whether it's sort of in private, we could carry on talking for hours. I'm not sure if everybody wants that exactly to happen, but it's been a fascinating session. Some really great points that you've picked up from the analysis, and thanks again for your time this morning.
No, thank you, Chris, and thank you, colleagues, for joining the session.
Thank you very much. Okay, so moving onwards with the programme now, and I'm now going to introduce Vangelis Siligiris to talk for the third part of today's programme. Vangelis is Principal Lecturer at Nottingham Business School at Nottingham Trent University. He's the founder of the TNE Hub and has acted as a higher education policy advisor to the governments of Greece and Malta. He's 15 years experience in European transnational education, having developed and managed a number of international partnerships of UK and other European universities. He's an active researcher in the areas of transnational education, international student experience, and business models of international higher education. So what better person to have talking with us today? His research has been published in international academic journals. He's conducted research for prominent organisations such as the British Council, Universities UK, and NAFSA. Wow. Well, great pleasure to welcome Vangelis today, who's going to be talking about the potential impact of Brexit on higher education, TNE provision in the EU. Over to you, Vangelis, and very nice to see you this morning.
Very nice to see you too. I hope you can hear me okay, first of all. So, yeah, can you hear me okay?
Sounds good to me.
Good. Thanks very much, and thanks for inviting me in yet one more of your lovely events. Just a note of warning, the half term started for us this week, so my 5-year-old is downstairs, so my presentation may have a soundtrack that could vary between screaming, shouting, and singing and laughing, so depending how the situation develops downstairs. So I'm going to be talking about TNE and Brexit, and as the previous speakers mentioned, obviously with Brexit is the big unknown. So nobody knows how this is going to develop. However, what I'm going to be summarizing is that there's some additional mega trends, I will call them, that will shape the future of UK higher education, that irrespective of Brexit, the sector needs to be aware and needs to take some action. So what I've done in the beginning of the presentation, I've collated some useful data, I think, for you to get an idea about the background. Obviously, when it comes to the EU students in the UK, the UCAS presentation had far more comprehensive data. The reason why I'm including this here is simply to give you the background of the key importing countries of TNE. So here you see a comparison between the position of major EU sending countries to the UK in 2008 and in 2018. Here I'm using the UNESCO data mainly for the sake of this time series analysis. So in 2018, we see Italy being at the top, France, Germany, and Greece. So you see that mainly is this, I will call them more developed in terms of their higher education system countries that are leading the inbound EU mobility, which reflects some of the points made previously by UCAS, that is mainly the segment of the EU student markets in the UK is looking mostly for, I would say, for the add-on quality experience rather than a way to access education. So bear that in mind. So obviously some other things you will notice here is that some of the other major sending countries back in 2018 have dropped slightly. Ireland is a major drop, although it seems that it's picking up again, but it's not up to the level that it was in 2008. And just to get an idea of how the EU market fits within the overall UK market, both at postgrad and undergrad, is not a major share. So it varies between 5 for undergraduate and 8 for postgraduate % of the total. And it remains pretty stable over the years on that percentage. But I think the important aspect there is that is the qualitative benefits for the students themselves, but also for their fellow students here in the UK who share the classroom with other EU students, but also for the universities. That makes this segment quite valuable for the sector. So not a major change there. Now going into the heart of the topic here, which is TNE. Like most of the other things, when it came to Brexit, I remember myself presenting back in 2016, trying to argue that let's wait and not jump on the train that said that TNE will replace EU student mobility. So at the time, right after the referendum, most of the discussion was, okay, let's go and open a branch campus in another European country. I think what we see here is that we haven't seen a great increase in the TNE numbers after the referendum. So consistently, again, the EU share of the total of the UK TNE is pretty stable. So over the past, I would say, about 10 years or so, it varies between 12 to 11%. In the early days, it used to be a much larger share, but that's not because of the size of the EU TNE, UK TNE in the European Union, but because of the size of the overall UK TNE, it was quite small at the time. So overall, pretty stable and not a major change there. The reason for that is that we need to consider that EU, in terms of higher education, is quite a mature market where there are not significant imbalances between supply and demand. So therefore, there is not a great room for TNE to grow as a way to cover that gaps, as it was the case, let's say, in the Southeast Asia region in the early days. So the rate of growth is pretty stable and relatively small. That gives you an idea of where is the larger shares of the UK TNE in the EU. Obviously, the majority is in 3-4 countries: Greece, Cyprus, Ireland, and Germany. You see that most of the numbers are concentrated in these countries. There haven't been any significant changes in these countries in the past years, although there has been quite a lot of appetite for TNE. The numbers are not still there. So, for example, it's been a lot of publicity about Poland, or a lot of publicity about, say, other countries like Belgium, or even Spain, but really the numbers are not that great yet. What I did here is it may seem a little bit complex, but what I did is I tried to account the rate of growth over a period of time, which is between 2007 and 2016. So the compound annual growth rate stands for what is the average annual growth rate for this period of time for that particular country in UK TNE. So that gives you an idea of how fast TNE was growing in that country. And then I did the same for the period after the referendum. So trying to account for any changes in the rate of growth. So trying to see if there's been some difference in the way that TNE was growing in each of these countries. So as you can see, there's no major differences. In fact, in some countries, it went down. I would not concentrate a lot on the absolute values, mainly because if you if you compare two uneven periods like these ones, you tend to get these anomalies. But the bottom line is that there is not any significant evidence there to suggest that there's been some positive trend in the UK TNE post-Brexit. So the key argument that was saying that students are now going to look for local alternatives to mobility to the UK is not there. There's been a couple of countries, Cyprus and Germany, where it has actually grown, but I would suggest this is not strictly because of Brexit. It's because of a number of other things, mainly because of the internationalization strategy of these two countries. So overall, no evidence there that there's been any significant impact on the positive side for UK TNE after Brexit. What I want to talk about now is try to think more about what is that drives TNE demand, and what I'm going to be sharing with you is some evidence of a research I did for the British Council Greece in 2019. Consistently, the top factors that drive student demand for UK TNE is the employment prospects and also the study abroad aspect. So beyond obviously the quality and reputation of UK education is the prospect of finding a better job in the international or the local market. So the aspect of employability and recognition of qualification is quite important. At the same time, as a way of getting a wider picture here, what I've done is I've tried to research what has been the outbound mobility from Greece to other European countries, including the UK. So these are Greeks who are studying abroad. In the past, the UK has been the top destination for Greeks. There's been a major drop in that. That major drop was mainly because the Greek system expanded its supply at some point in time. But at the same time, what you see here is you see other countries becoming emerging destination of Greeks. So Netherlands is one, Germany and Cyprus. And I think that should reflect the kind of developments that need to be taken into account by the UK sector, is the emergence of other European countries as destinations of students from the European Union. Now, when it comes to the perceptions, so most of the UK TNE students in Greece consider that Brexit will affect them in a negative way, obviously, 50%. And this revolves around the expectation that fees will go up, and this will somehow affect the collaboration between the two countries. It would be more difficult for them to enter the UK and get a student visa if they wanted to continue their studies. So again, is a mix of issues revolving around mobility post graduation, and at the same time, the last one, this uncertainty about whether the degree is going to be recognized. When it comes to the local partners now, so the local partners is the private colleges that provide UK TNE in Greece specifically. Interestingly enough, they still don't see the Brexit as being having a negative impact on them. So they are quite confident that there's going to be a solution there. Mainly, this derives from the fact that they believe on the standing and quality of UK higher education, and particularly on the know-how of UK institutions in providing transnational education. So at some point in time, they were considering alternative countries like France and Netherlands and Ireland. But what it came out from the interviews we had with them is that they found that these countries are not as developed when it comes to T&E provision. So overall, in summary, the perceptions on the other end is that Brexit will affect students in a way that will impact their employability within their countries and the EU, and at the same time probably will create problems in their effort to study in the UK after they complete the T&E program in their country. Local partners are quite loyal, and they believe that Brexit won't be a problem. Now, instead of writing 20 slides about the recognition issue, because that's a very complex issue and a very complex problem, the main issue here is, and the main concern is, what will happen post-Brexit to the recognition of the UK T&E degrees in the European Union. So there is a great variation between the different approaches in different countries. So for instance, in Greece, that's a big problem because most of the recognition happens as part of the EU directive for the free movement of people and professions. But at the same time, this is an issue in other countries, and I'm copying here from a report that literally came out a few days ago, and it has an extract there that is quite indicative of the problem. So this is about a specific program or set of programs that offer it in Bavaria. So it's not only a matter of one country, but could be also regional issues. So in Germany and in Bavaria, T&E, UK T&E won't be recognized if the UK leaves the EU. So that is at the heart of the challenges of what will happen post-Brexit. Now, with all these unknowns, so it would be very easy to say again, we don't know what is going to happen, we have to wait, is all this uncertainty. Yeah, that's fine, I get that. What I'm suggesting here is that no matter what will happen with Brexit, there has to be some clear thinking by the sector and by institutions about their future strategy. And what I'm proposing here is a model that has a number of factors in it. One is, of course, what is going to be the position of the UK in the European higher education area post-Brexit. That will define what will be the case of recognition and transferability of UK qualifications. But at the same time, and obviously that's something that is not upon us to decide, but at the same time, universities need to consider T&E as part of a broader institution strategy. So it could not be an approach that is based simply on a plan to, say, cover some missing EU students that didn't come in the main campus. So T&E requires very careful planning and very careful consideration of the trends of the market. The different models require different resources. So, for example, whether you do franchising validation or you do a branch campus or you do an online provision, these are quite different models that require different resources and know-how. So universities need to think about those and whether these fit their institution strategy. And then is the concept of the TNE approach and the TNE model, and whether that is the appropriate one for them. Few thoughts, and I finish here, is Brexit and COVID are quite similar in a sense, because they cause this level of uncertainty, which at the same time like automatically creates a number of expectations and possibly false perceptions about the market. So like Brexit, COVID causes this perception that TNE, and particularly online, can act as a substitute to EU mobility. I doubt that, because like the data presented previously, students who want and who are capable of studying in the UK, they would do so because they want the experience, and at the same time they see the study in country as a way of differentiating themselves in the employment market. At the same time, the expectation about the use of online as a substitute to mobility has to be considered more carefully. Online is not new. It's been around for many years and is directed to very specific segments of the student market, mainly mature students who can manage themselves and who are capable of self-motivating themselves in an online environment. Online is very difficult to be applied to undergrad and postgrad, especially when the students want face-to-face as the main teaching model. So my advice there would be to think very, very carefully and explore exactly the perceptions of the students about particularly the use of online as a substitute to EU mobility. So I leave you with these thoughts, and I'm open to questions.
Thanks very much, Vangelis. That's a fascinating insight into the current situation and how Brexit is and isn't affecting UK TNE provisions. So a reminder to everybody in the audience, if you do have questions for us to discuss, please post them in the chat box. I've got one to get us started as a general question, Vangelis. If you are a UK higher education institution, what are the sorts of factors and considerations that you think that institution needs to consider if they want to pursue TNE within the EU?
Always my advice on that is to try to align TNE with your internationalization strategy. So, because now in a bizarre way, TNE is considered as an outlier. So mainly is internationalization, which has this perception of being more superior to TNE, and then you have TNE, which is pursued as a way of additional third stream income kind of activities. So the key question would be why you want to do TNE. Is it student numbers, or is it reputation and other benefits you are seeking to get out of it? It may be a bit of both, but there has to be one of the two that dominates your decision, because this will then dictate what model you will prefer when it comes to, and which countries you will target. So if you're looking for, let's say, the softer benefits of transnational education, which is about building your reputation in the European market, or creating some research collaborations, or initiating some dual and joint degrees with reputable partners, that is the way to go. But if it's let's say, complementing some of your declining EU inbound mobility market with some TNE recruitment, then probably you need to target countries with imbalances in supply and demand, particularly when it comes to specific courses. So you go in a country where you see a very clear gap in the supply, and you offer that as a way of recruiting students, and you probably go through validation franchising rather than, or even online, rather than double and joint degrees.
That's really interesting. And as you said during your talk, if I understood correctly, the EU HE market is already mature and well developed. So by extension, that seems to make it maybe harder to have that growth of TNE for institutions that are looking to do it. You've picked up that the motivation behind wanting to offer TNE is key. What is the objective? How does that then fit with the fact that the market is mature and may prove to be quite a challenge?
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly the point. So an additional factor there is that you have a market that is maturing. So there are not as many imbalances as there were in many years ago. So currently there's not any quantity related imbalances. So you have to go in the market, explore the market very carefully and see what sort of supply gaps exist, but not in any sort of business and management, for example, program, but you have to go far more deeper into the market to understand where the gaps are. At the same time, EU is expanding its own TNE model. So you see these European universities alliances that are coming into fruition now, and soon you will see universities in the EU collaborating with each other in a way that will automatically enable them to develop this kind of joint arrangements. So I think the UK is facing this challenge of being so near to a market that is maturing and could potentially provide quite a lot of, especially soft benefits. And I think that is the main loss for the UK rather than the numbers. I think the numbers, as the UCAS presentation has suggested, are likely to stay there. I don't see any decline in numbers, to be honest, because the students you see now coming in the UK from EU are the ones who are able and willing to come. These are not the students who are going to choose TNE as an alternative for that.
Okay, thank you. And just one more question, if I may, and that's been asked by Adele David. Thanks, Adele, for your question. It's come up in the chat box, Vangelis. And she's asking, how big is the risk that post-Brexit, UK and EU degrees won't be mutually recognised and transferable? Tying in, I guess, with the recognition question that you raised earlier, and something obviously that is of interest and close to my heart from working at UK NARIC. What's your view on this?
I think UK NARIC has a very central role to play on that. My feeling is that there's going to be some solution on this, because that's relatively easy to fix. The different qualifications are already benchmarked using the different national frameworks. So it's not going to be a massive undertaking. It's going to be mainly on professions which are regulated that this will create problems, because the European Union framework allowed this mobility of professions in the European Union area. Whereas now, if you have the UK sitting outside of that, there's going to be several countries that are going to impose barriers, simply because the regulated professions are regulated by certain associations in different countries that they have their own vested interests. So the higher the barriers to entry in these professions, the more reputable these professions are, and the lower the supply. So I don't see it's going to be a huge problem. It's going to be some sort of uncertainty for a couple of years. But the main area is going to be the regulated professions, that it may take a while for that to settle.
Okay, that's interesting. So it'll relate principally to what is currently referred to as the mutual recognition of professional qualifications, and it's that's likely to be challenged as opposed to recognition per se, whether the UK is part of the EU or outside of it.
Yeah, I'm mainly referring to professions like engineers, doctors, even accountants. That in order for you to exercise the profession in a country, you have to have a degree. So that is the recognition in terms of the academic side of things, but also be member of the local association. Yeah. So is that latter part that may be problematic, because they, by law, they have the right to impose their own requirements, unless you are coming from a European Union.
Yeah, where the directive then comes into force.
Yeah,
exactly. I have a sneaky feeling that we could talk about this for some time, but I'm mindful of your time and of our next speakers. I think it just remains for me to thank you, Vangelis, for a really interesting talk once again. Really good to see you with us this year. Hopefully we'll get a chance to catch up soon. Thanks again, Vangelis.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay. Well, yeah, that was a really interesting talk. We're now on to the final stage of today's program. And I'm going to welcome Deepa Chadha into the seminar now. Deepa has been an advice and training officer at UKISA for 11 years. Her role involves advising students, members of the public, and UKISA members on UK's immigration law and EU law as they relate to students. She does that as well as delivering training nationally, representing relevant sector issues at meetings with the Home Office, and undertaking liaison and lobbying with relevant UK government departments. No mean feat, sounds like a busy portfolio. In her time at UKISA, she's presented at national and European conferences and has taught on a postgraduate course as an associate lecturer within the University of Nottingham, and that's been for 7 years. So not just content with being busy in the job, also looking to expand beyond that with the lecturing work. Fascinating bio. And Deepa is going to be providing us with an immigration update this morning on EU students. Really nice to see you this morning, Deepa. A very warm welcome, and over to you for the last part of the session.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me on today. I think my slides are hopefully coming up in a second. I will just say sorry to those who would like the slides. I think this session is recorded, so you will get the recording. The reason we're not giving the slides to you is because I'm going to talk about something a little bit more granular than our last speaker, and the information in the presentation today is going to change quite frequently in the next few months, I think. So it's probably advisable that people refer instead to our website, which I think you can see the details of at the bottom of each slide as I go through. So I won't need to introduce myself again because I got a very nice bio. Thank you very much for that. Just a few points before I start, though. I'm focusing today's talk on immigration matters for EU, EEA and Swiss citizens coming to the UK or those who are already in the UK. I'm not going to be covering family members of those students, and I'm not going to be covering matters other than immigration. We do have updated information on entitlement to home fee rates and student support, as well as healthcare on our website as well. Please note that what I am saying today is what we know today, and as I've said earlier, things do change very frequently, so please do keep up to date with our website. Finally, it's really important to say that all the immigration advice can only be given by someone who is regulated and competent to give advice. So it's really important to refer to the right person or people at the UK educational institution who are in this position. Just one other note, which is that when I refer to EEA citizens or students, I'm covering EU, EEA and Swiss citizens unless I specifically mention a group. So first of all, I'm going to outline the position the UK is currently in with respect to the EU. Okay, so the UK left the EU on the 31st of January 2020. Before the UK left, there was an agreement about citizens' rights. This agreement formed part of the withdrawal agreement between the UK and the EU. And there are similar agreements between the UK and the EEA EFTA states and between the UK and Switzerland. and the agreements are broadly similar in respect of citizens' rights. All of these agreements have been implemented into UK law in the form of the European Union Withdrawal Agreement Act 2020. So what do these agreements and acts say as far as citizens' rights? Well, what they do is put into place a transition period. We're currently in that transition period, and that transition period will end at 11 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time on the 31st of December 2020. They have also put into place immigration protection for those who are in the UK before the end of this transition period. This is in the form of an immigration route, which I'll just talk about in a moment. I'm going to divide this presentation into two sections. The first dealing with those who are in the UK or coming to the UK before the end of this transition period. And the second part, I'll deal with those who are coming to the UK from the 1st of January 2021, from when there will be a new immigration route in place. So what does the transition period actually mean? So in the transition period, the UK operates as though it's still in the EU for the purposes of citizens' rights, and therefore there is still free movement between the UK and the rest of the EU during this time. The Citizens Directive and all of the EU law, including case law, continues to apply. It's important to advise that EEA citizens who are in the UK during this transition period are here in line with the directive. Therefore, if they are in the UK as students only and not also as workers, it's advisable for them to have comprehensive sickness insurance, which can be in the form of a European health insurance card or private medical insurance. This is especially important if before the end of the transition period, they haven't got their immigration protection in the form of a UK immigration permission issued to them. So what is the UK immigration protection offered to this group in the UK before the end of the transition period? So it's called the EU Settlement Scheme. I'm sure you've heard about it before as well. And people who are in the UK, EEA citizens who are in the UK before the end of the transition period will need to apply for this or for some other form of immigration protection, as they will not be able to benefit from free movement beyond the 1st of January 2021. There is a slightly later deadline after the end of the transition period by which to apply for the scheme, but it is really strongly advisable to apply as soon as possible if intending to stay after the deadline. So the reason people need immigration permission is that it's important to be here lawfully, but also because employers, landlords, educational institutions, etc., all need to see proof of someone's entitlement to be in the UK and carry out a particular activity before they can let someone work or rent or study, etc. This is all part of the UK government policy of a compliant environment, which was previously called a hostile environment, which allows for penalties on employers or educational institutions or landlords who don't check and retain proof where required of someone's permission to work or study or rent, etc. So until they have this permission, it's really important that they are in line with the Citizens Directives, as I've said earlier. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the key features of the EU settlement scheme now. So this scheme is not just for those who intend to settle in the UK, despite the unfortunate title, which is the EU settlement scheme. It is to enable people who have immigration permission under UK law when the EU law is no longer applicable in the UK, so i.e. after the transition period. There's no sponsorship requirement, so any EEA citizen who is eligible can make an application on their own merits. So it's a fairly straightforward route. It's an application which is free, it's online, and the deadline to apply if somebody is in the UK before the end of the transition period is the 30th of June 2021, but it is strongly advisable to apply as soon as possible and advisable to apply before the 31st of December 2020. Successful applicants don't get an immigration document, but instead can access their status through an online portal, and they can give access to other people. So the people I mentioned who need to check, like educational institutions, landlords, employers, etc. If they are granted leave under the EU settlement scheme, they are entitled to work and study. So there's no restrictions on that. So the other key features of the settlement scheme is that if they are granted leave under the scheme, they get either pre-settled status, which is if they are living in the UK for under 5 years, or they'll get settled status if they've been living in the UK for 5 years or longer. And this isn't just after transition, this is pre-transition and post-transition combined. So if they get pre-settled status, they'll get a grant of immigration permission of 5 years. And if they get settled status, they will get indefinite leave to remain, which can only be lost if they're continuously out of the UK for either 5 years or 4 years if they're Swiss citizens. I've used the word living here sort of loosely. There is a definition in the immigration rules, which is continuous qualifying period. And that continuous qualifying period allows for some permitted absences, as well as talking about some periods which are not going to be allowed to be covered as parts of residence relating to things like imprisonment. So really another important point to note is that those with pre-settled status will need to apply for settled status before the end of that expiry. So basically, people need to have permission the entire time after we end the deadline for the transition period, so that they are always here with immigration permission. So if there is permission that's about to expire, it's important that they then make the application to continue that immigration permission. Nothing will happen automatically, which is a huge change from how it is for them currently. So what is also really important is to note that this immigration permission is immigration permission which is granted under the UK rules. So any changes to those rules will go through a parliamentary process like any other immigration rules do, and people need to check what the new requirements or conditions are within the UK rules. As I said, it's important to stay up to date by looking at our website. So before we move on to what happens post-transition, I'm just going to share a slide which shows a sort of timeline, and this relates to when somebody might come to the UK, and depending on their arrival in the UK and when they come to live in the UK, what immigration route they'll apply for. So far I've been talking about the EU settlement scheme, and that is for people who arrive in the UK before the end of the transition period, which you'll see from the pink box, the pink line at the bottom. And the deadline for them applying for that is the 30th of June 2021. If they come from the 1st of January 2021, then they will be applying under other immigration routes, which we'll look at in a moment. So the really key point of everything from today is knowing when somebody arrives in the UK and the differences between arriving pre-transition and post-transition. So now going to just move on to looking at what happens if people arrive post-transition. So what's really important to note is that the current immigration system is being reviewed, with the new system due to be in place from January 2021. No coincidence with that date. It's meant to be coming in place as soon as the transition period is over. But the student route, which is the main student route which exists now, has already been replaced and is already open to EEA students to apply from outside of the UK, from their countries of residence, from 9 AM on the 5th of October, so that's already in place. And that's if they're coming from the 1st of January, so they can apply for that permission now, but it won't be valid until the 1st of January at the earliest, and later if they're coming to study a bit later. So I'm going to highlight 3 of the immigration routes, but as I said, you need to check our website for the detail because this is changing quite quickly. The main difference to note from the free movement and also from the EU settlement scheme is that the permission that comes from the immigration route is going to be tied to the purpose of someone's visit to the UK. So if they're coming here to visit, they'll be here as a visitor. If they're coming here to study, they'll be here as a student, etc. So that is very different from free movement. It's also very different from the EU settlement scheme, which basically allows you to be here with permission and to undertake all different activities. Okay, so I'm quickly going to just talk about the visit route and the short-term student route before we move into the main student route. So these are going to be changing from their current format. Currently they're in place and they are very much as they read. So the visit route is for visitors and the short-term student route is for short-term students. The routes are not currently open to EEA citizens in their current format, so they will be changing, as I said, from January 2021. And the differences are going to be that the visitor route is going to allow up to 6 months of study, which it doesn't currently allow. So that's good news. The rules are not out yet, so this is only what we know from a government paper. And what it says in the government paper is that the visit route, when it's open to EEA citizens, will allow up to 30 days of study on a recreational course that doesn't lead to a qualification, which can be studied at any institution, or up to 6 months of non-recreational study at an accredited institution. So that is really, really good news from January of 2021. That will be for everybody from outside the UK who's applying to come as a visitor, not just for EEA citizens, but it's a change from how it is now, and it's really, really good news. So that means that the short-term student route, which was currently for all short-term study, will only then be for people who are coming from 6 to 11 months to study an English language only course at an accredited institution. So as I said, these two routes are going to be changing from their current format, and the route and the detail will only really come out when the rules are in place and laid before Parliament, and we will update our website as soon as that happens. So I'm now just going to quickly take us through the student route and the changes and the features of that, sorry. So some changes that are will be completely new to EU students coming for the first time is that they'll need to get permission before they come to the UK if they're coming under this route. So it's not that they can turn up and get the permission on entry or when they're here. They'll have to get this permission before they come to the UK. So this is for the students who are coming for a course of longer than 6 months, or one which doesn't otherwise meet the new visitor rules. And as I said, they'll need to get this permission before coming. The permission is going to be linked to the course and to the institution. So as I said at the beginning, the immigration routes are all sort of linked to purpose, and this is no different. This goes a bit further in that it's linked to not only the institution, it's also linked to the course for which they've got the permission. So the institution needs to take some responsibility for ensuring they're a genuine student and will study on the course they have accepted a place on. If an institution is satisfied that they are and they meet the other immigration requirements, they assign them a confirmation of acceptance of studies. The student uses this to apply for their immigration permission. As it is student permission, the institution takes the responsibility for certain student activity, and they will monitor this and report on this as well. Students will be required to show that they meet English language requirements detailed in the rules, and there are a number of ways this can be demonstrated, including being a citizen of listed countries in the rules. They'll also have to meet financial requirements, unless they're exempt, as I've listed here. They've lived in the UK with permission for 12 months or longer when they make their in-country application. And they will have to only have a maximum number of years in the student route if they're studying below degree level or at degree level. There's no longer a cap if they're above degree level, which is also good news. It's changed from how it is currently. There is the possibility of the Home Office undertaking credibility interviews to test the genuineness of students, and students can be refused if they fail these credibility interviews. There is also academic progress requirements that need to be met, and this is if students want to do further courses under the student route and apply from within the UK for further permission. In these cases, they will have to demonstrate academic progression. This essentially means that they have to have completed a course and be moving on to a higher level course. There are exemptions to this as outlined in the rules and summarised in our web information. As it is a student route, they can only work in certain circumstances according to the level of course and the type of institution that they'll be studying at. If they're allowed to work at all, and this will be indicated to them in their permission that they are granted, the most that they'll be allowed to do is up to 20 hours in term time, and then unlimited outside of term time. Although work placements are allowed in most cases as long as that placement meets certain requirements. And only certain students can bring certain family members. For example, students studying full-time postgraduate courses of 9 months or longer, or government-sponsored students who are studying full-time courses of 6 months or longer. So in summary, it's important to know, as I've said throughout the presentation, when students came or are coming to the UK, i.e. is it pre or post transition, and therefore what permission they should apply for and by what deadline. It's important to know where to signpost for information on the EU settlement scheme and information on the student route. and to be aware of changes to immigration rules, which would come through a statement of changes and go through a parliamentary process, which impact the EU settlement scheme, the student route, the visitor route, and the short-term student route. But as I said, we do all the summaries of those on our website. So just in conclusion, as I said, the impact will depend on when a student arrives in the UK, and it's important to stay up to date, and I've given you a link to our website. I think I'm handing over now.
Thanks very much for that, Deepa. That was very thorough indeed, and we really appreciate your time coming and talking with us this morning. If there was one thing that you wanted to highlight to everybody from that, you're providing the information as to the changes in the immigration situation. If people actually wanted immigration advice, what would you recommend that attendees do?
I would definitely suggest that they seek the advice from the incoming institution that the student is going to go to. So within each institution, there are usually dedicated advisors, international student advisors, they're most frequently referred to as, but they could have other titles. And most of those do advise on what is currently called the Tier 4 route and is now going to be the student route, as has already just changed name, sorry, to the student route. So there are already dedicated advisors within those institutions, and I would definitely refer students to those people.
Okay, thank you. And of course, by the sounds of things, and this has been a theme throughout today, a degree of change and uncertainty and the possibility of more change, it always seems to be not far away from what we're discussing. Is that also your perception and perspective?
I think the constant change is definitely a feature, and it hasn't been helped at all with the COVID crisis, which has also impacted immigration as well. So a new immigration route, Brexit rules, and COVID concessions in terms of immigration, all on top of each other, have meant that we've all had to be constantly updating daily.
No mean feat, and plenty of work and commitment for you, no doubt.
Definitely, yes, it has been more than a full-time job at the moment. Yeah, but I mean, it's definitely important that we try and keep students as up to date as possible. So, and we're lucky that students themselves, have been finding the information and asking questions, because we have a dedicated advice line. I know somebody's asking for email addresses, but we do have a dedicated advice line for students as well. So people who want to refer students to us directly can go onto our website, look for the information either through our website or refer students to ring our dedicated free helpline, which is open every day, weekdays.
Thank you for that, and for pointing people in the direction of the UKISA website. That's really useful. I've got a couple of questions actually from the attendees as well, if you're happy to take those. The first one's from Noel. Is it likely that the visitor route for study of under 6 months duration will be subject to the current visa national guidelines? So
it's currently going to be that the visitor route will apply to, so just for people who don't know what the visa national list is, so the people who are visa nationals always have to get permission before they come to the UK, even if that's just as a visitor. And the people who are not on that visa national list can just come to the UK and they basically get it on arrival. So the visa national list is going to continue. It's going to still be there for people who want to come to visit. They will still need to get entry clearance essentially before they come to the UK. That visa national list will not include EEA countries, so they will all be able to come to the UK and essentially just come in as visitors on arrival, but essentially seeking entry on that purpose on arrival.
Okay, thank you. And I'm not sure if this is also related. You're in a far better position than I am to comment on this, just as while I'm asking you the questions. There's a question from one of our other presenters. Will there be flexibility for students to change between, for example, the visitor route to student routes when they are in the UK? Or will students have to return home first to their home country before coming back?
So there is more flexibility now since the rules changed on the 5th of October to switch into the student route, but not from the visitor route. Unfortunately, there are still some restrictions, which I think include, I don't want to say definitely because I can't remember for sure, but I think it still includes visitor as one that they can't switch from. But there is definitely a lot more flexibility than there used to be in terms of who can switch into the student route. So please do have a look at our website to definitely, check that. But there's more flexibility from pre the 5th of October, which we're pleased about.
Thank you, and a good pointer there that we've got the website address that you refer to on screen, so people can use that as the first access point and then take themselves wherever they particularly need for advice and guidance. Okay, well, a pleasure to meet you today, Deepa, and thanks so much for coming and sharing your insights and spending some time with us. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you all very much, and please do note if any questions come up on our advice line to us. Thank you.
Thanks again. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Okay, well, it just remains now for me to sum up today's session. It's been different. As we've all established, we're not at the Royal Society of Chemistry. We're in my spare room. But it's been a fantastic morning of debate. I'm sure you'll agree. Fantastic morning of discussion, stimulating conversation, a great way to spend Friday morning. Firstly, I'd like to sort of thank each of the speakers and reflect upon some of the observations and perspectives they brought us. Anna May spoke first, and she talked about the different permutations that are on their way or likely at the end of the transition period. I think it was fair to say there are a lot of unknowns that she acknowledged, a lot of possibilities that institutions and students are going to need to bear in mind. Perhaps also a lot of frustrations that there isn't the clarity that people would crave. I think one thing that stood out as well is to pay attention to the outcome of the change in the fee status for students and to keep an eye on that impact in future years. Mark Wilson from UCAS, he spoke to us about the European student trends and provided some interesting analysis. Plenty of interesting statistics on the growth in EU students, what I made out to be with my mathematical prowess, nearly 70% between 2006 to 2016. Mark reflected on some of the disruption, some of the major disruption that COVID has caused this year, but it was interesting also to pick out from his talk that the effect on the drop of EU applicants perhaps wasn't as great as might have been initially anticipated. And fascinating to note from Mark's talk today as well, that there are some steep increases amongst the younger profile of students from within the EU. And we will keep our eyes peeled and on future studies that UCAS put out there on student patterns and trends in the future for undergraduate study. We had a little break, and then when we came back, Vangelis Siligiri spoke to us about Brexit and potential effects on UK higher education transnational activities across different EU countries. And in many respects, Vangelis reflected not too dissimilar trends to Mark, in the sense that the numbers of students interested in UK TNE maybe had dropped slightly, but certainly that there was overall a sustained interest in programs across many different countries. Vangelis pointed out to us, of course, that the EU higher education market is a mature one, and so perhaps there are not so many imbalances in demand, maybe less scope for TNE to grow. Growth is stable and relatively small. I think one of the key things I took from this talk in terms of embarking upon TNE was that the motivation and the purpose behind embarking upon a particular transnational education activity was particularly important. From a UK NARIC perspective, it was interesting to note as well that he picked up on recognition as a potential issue, and in particular with regard to the mutual recognition of professional qualifications for such professions including engineering, architecture and medicine. Finally, Deepa just finished speaking to us, and she talked to us about the potential effects that Brexit may have on student immigration, and talked about the advice and information that students will now need to bear in mind when they're applying to come into the UK. Deepa left her website at UKISA to direct any particular inquiries from students to help them with any question related to that immigration route. Maybe a few thoughts from me then, from UK NARIC as well. I mean, this year has really posed so many different challenges brought about by the global pandemic. And I think we've focused a lot of our energies, our research attentions and output into areas that we think help our members and help the wider sector in education. Just to point out a few things that may be of interest for you. We have a blog that charts the impact of the pandemic on international secondary education. Mark talked a little bit about that as well earlier, in terms of the profoundly disruptive effect that the pandemic has had on education this year. We've also produced a series of special reports on the impact. Interestingly, linking up with what Vangelis was saying, we did also anticipate perhaps a greater interest in online delivery, and specifically from a recognition perspective. So we provide a guide to recognition issues in international distance learning. We released the first report in May, and that covered 9 countries. We're going to release another publication imminently. And as I say, all of these resources are freely available from UK NARIC. So if you go to the home page, scroll midway down, there's a band that goes across the screen saying our resources to support you, and you'll find all sorts of interesting information there for you. So are we at the beginning of the end then, or the end of the beginning? As we know, yesterday was touted as being the day for turning away should no deal be reached. Which way are we facing now? What will 2021 hold in store for us? Or is it going to be a brave new world? Do we have positive visions? Or is there going to be some dawn of stark realization? Or are we going to be sitting somewhere in between? In previous seminars, we've spoken about maintaining that positive outlook, looking to make Brexit work, irrespective of the situation, of looking to continue that collaboration, partnership and togetherness with our EU counterparts and colleagues, a constructive means, if you like, to ensure a sustained relationship between the sectors. And as you know, we're now getting ever closer to that moment of truth. And as we speak, I noticed from an alert on my phone that The Guardian is now reporting that our Prime Minister is saying the UK should prepare for a no-deal Brexit and potentially an Australian-style future. That's something for us to finish on and think about before we consider perhaps the next Cambridge special event on Brexit. It just remains for me then to do a series of thanks. Firstly to Cambridge, once again, for hosting this great event. 2 events in London at the Royal Society of Chemistry's library, one by Zoom. And I think my feeling is, I hope you share this same feeling, that it's been a great success today. Thanks to Petra Olsen, the principal organizer, and Kajula for bringing this all together. And then to Jamie and Emma for their background support and technical prowess and expertise in making this whole thing work. My sincere thanks to you all. And lastly, my thanks to the speakers, to Anna May, to Mark, to Vangelis, to Deepa. Fascinating perspectives, fascinating insights. And lastly, and by no means least, thanks to you for coming here today, the audience, for your attention, your participation, and for your engagement and questions. I really do hope that you've taken a lot from today's discussion and have enjoyed the variety of speakers that we have offered. Just a reminder, before we go, the recording will be sent to you in the coming weeks. There's been questions throughout the Q&A about the recording. That's going to be sent out to you next week. Okay, so in these uncertain and trying times, I wish you all well for the coming weeks and the coming months. I hope we get the chance to reconvene in person next time, and hopefully not too far into the future either. So thank you, goodbye for now, and stay safe.